Micro 9's. Small semi-auto carry guns. They're pretty popular. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting tactics, the right way with God Almighty at the center. Biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. My bona fides, street cred, bullet points are in the show notes. 23 years, I had to think about that. 23 years of carrying a handgun for fighting, for defense, military, law enforcement, private security contracting, awful work as a citizen. As a professional firearms instructor, an F.B.I. certified firearms instructor in the private sector, in, let's call it defensive handgun, fighting handgun. Most importantly, though, I'm a Christian. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. All right, let's talk about Micro 9's. I guess my first very small semi-auto would have been my off-duty gun. My first backup gun would have been a little snub-nose 380 when I was L.A.P.D. Obviously, in the military, we use full-size handguns. But I use a little snub-nose 380 that sometimes I would also carry off work, L.A.P.D. And then I got a Glock 26. Glock 26 is a pretty good gun. I would consider it's a subcompact. Definitely falls into this realm. I have one of those for years and years and years. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll probably forget some. But I made a list of, just to give you an idea of small semi-autos, not counting revolvers, but small semi-autos that I have carried heretofore. Not all the ones I have experience with, but all the ones that I've carried. And that would be the Glock 26, Smith & Wesson Subcompact. That would be the M&P, the first gen. A CAR 9mm. I forget all the designations. It was a C9 or CM9 or one of those. CAR, very like the OG Micro 9's, slim, single stacked. Glock 43. Glock 42 is not a 9mm, but and then an FN 509C. And as you might imagine, being a firearms instructor, I have experience with a lot of other platforms. And the other platforms I have some experience with would be hard to list. Now let me talk about why I don't even own one anymore at this current time. And it's not one of the big ones that you might think. Capacity. Look, I'm all in favor. This is not me telling you that you shouldn't be able to have regular capacity magazines. But the fact is, your ability to get fast first, second, and third round hits on target is exponentially more important than whether you have a 15-round gun or a 17-round gun. Like, those two rounds are exponentially less important than your first, second, third, fourth round. But you may need, it's not uncommon, especially with multiple attackers, for you to need, 4 rounds, 8 rounds, half a dozen rounds, up to a dozen rounds. After that, it starts getting pretty slim whether you're going to need those rounds or not, even if you are fairly competent with a handgun. If you're just lobbing rounds out there hoping for the best, I don't think any number of rounds is really going to help you that much. So I don't really care that much about capacity. That's not one of the big arguments that I would use. What you are giving up capacity, but probably not relevant. Here's what you are giving up, though: a full-size fighting grip. Most of these handguns, you're not getting a full-size fighting grip on. A lot of people generally could use some work on their grip. If you ever see somebody shooting and every time the gun goes off, they have to adjust their grip, that's a problem. That really is going to hurt you on how fast you can shoot. And it gets exponentially harder when you start cutting grip off of that gun. Like, you could get a gun so big, like if you're regular size hands and you're shooting a Glock 21, you could get so big that hurts you the other way because you can't effectively grip the gun because it's too big for your hands. But when you start going to the subcompacts and the micro guns, when your fingers start hanging off the gun or you start not being able to get both hands in contact with the gun, that really is going to hurt your ability to be effective. If you have to adjust your grip every time you shoot the gun, that's a huge problem. And that is not necessarily the case with the Micro 9, but for a lot of people, they do that on a regular size gun. And they especially do it on a compact gun because it's way harder. So that is a big, big deal. I don't think is talked about enough. But that lack of proper grip ability is a huge deal. A huge deal. So that's a big one. Probably one of the preeminent ones for me is accuracy. Accuracy, and not just mechanical accuracy, right? You could get a little, I know we're talking semi-autos, but you could get a little tiny J-frame. And those are phenomenally mechanically accurate guns. If you put it in a ransom rest and, shoot for groups, that's fine, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your ability to shoot the gun accurately. And sight radius is a real thing, right? The farther those sights are apart in general, the more accurate you're going to be able to be with that gun. That's just a real thing, right? So accuracy there, and then also even if you're using an optic, that is no excuse of these being not giving up a lot of accuracy. And here's why. If you have, let's pick Glock because they have garbage triggers and they're really popular. Let's say you have two Glocks and they both have the regular vomit in your mouth Glock trigger. Nasty, dirty, gritty, grimy, like dragging a piano down a dirt road. And one of them is a Glock 17, the normal size, man size Glock, a regular size Glock. And one of them is a Glock 43, their Micro 9. And they both have the same trigger. They both have a 6.5 pound. I know they say it's like 5.5, but that's being very, very, very optimistic. If you actually measure it from the center of the trigger, let's call it a 6 pound trigger to be generous for an actual trigger pull. If one of those guns is a fraction of the weight of the other, when you pull that trigger, if your trigger pull is not perfect, and it's almost never perfect, I don't care how good you are. I don't say this to brag, but I'm a several times over state pistol champion. I know my way around a handgun. I've won more handgun competitions. I've been blessed to win more of those than I can honestly remember in a bunch of different disciplines, right? Your trigger pull is almost never perfect. If you're in a static environment, like just focusing on your trigger pull and you're watching your sights or your dot, you're almost certainly going to move it every single time. There will be that one time maybe in a practice session where everything's perfect and there's just an audible click and nothing at all moves. That's what you strive for every single time. But even an expert shooter almost never gets that with a handgun. So that being said, let me rephrase it. The smaller and lighter the gun is, if you put the same amount of imperfection in the trigger pull, you're going to move that smaller gun more. So you are going to be less accurate with that Micro 9 than you would be with a real size handgun, a Glock 17 or a Glock 43. Unless there's just some weird thing going on, you shoot both of those with the same trigger, set up the same way for groups at, let's say you run a course of fire, 25, 15, and 7 yards. 5, 5, and 5. You're almost certainly going to shoot much better with a 17 than you are the 43. Accuracy, right? Accuracy. The whole point of you having that gun, hopefully, is not for a security blanket. It's not so you can say, me too, look, I have a handgun. I'm safe now. It's my security blankie. No, your goal of having that handgun is being able to get hits on target. So accuracy is really important. Next is important is speed, because you could be the most accurate in the world. If you can't get that gun into action and the time it takes before somebody else dies or before you die, right? You could be super accurate with that gun, but if you get shot in the face before you bring that gun to get accurate hits on target, your accuracy is irrelevant, right? So accuracy is absolutely important, but getting that gun in action quickly is also important. And let's be honest here. You're probably not carrying that Micro 9 in a quick, deployable way. And I don't care how many people or influencers or YouTube glitterati tell you wiener carry is an appropriate carry method. I'm going to tell you that I don't think that it is. You can disagree if you want. If you want to carry a gun pointed at your genitals, go ahead. If you want to pretend it's fast, go ahead. It's not going to be as fast as you carrying a handgun strong side hip. The way virtually everybody that's quick, that shoots competition since the Old West has carried their gun. If you look at quick draw competitions, how do they carry it? Strong side hip. If you look at USPSA, IDPA, how do they carry? Strong side hip. And if you're carrying, I'm not saying you should never carry this way, but if you're carrying in a pocket, pointed at your genitals, inside the waistband, any of those things at 6 o'clock, at 7 o'clock, at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, you're carrying any of those positions, you are absolutely giving up speed. You are probably not carrying your Glock 43 outside the waistband, strong side hip. Because if you were, let's be honest, you might as well carry a bigger handgun. It's just better. The reason you're carrying that is probably so you can carry it in another position, because you don't want to carry a full-size handgun. And it's going to be slower. So now we're at less accurate and slower. I'm sorry if that offends you, but that's just true. So you're giving up accuracy, you're giving up speed, you're giving up time. Now I'm going to be honest with you, that may be irrelevant, right? But don't pretend or don't imagine in your, survival fantasy or gunfighting fantasy that the person that's trying to kill you is going to give you all the time that you need. That is a very, very poor assumption. You may, right? If somebody's coming to shank you at your car getting gas late at night, by the way, in general, keep over half a tank of gas so you don't have to stop for gas in the middle of the night. That's just a good practical life skill or life tip practice. But if you get what we call, as a cop, the old stop and rob, 7-Eleven at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you see somebody walking up to you with a crowbar or a knife in the parking lot to come rob you, yet you may have plenty of time to get your gun out, even from your pocket, and, get it at the ready. And you may be able to wait with the car door between you until he gets close enough that, the super subcompact 9mm, the time and the accuracy is not relevant. And that's a lot. That's a lot of the time. But that's a very dangerous assumption to assume that in your life or death situation, you are going to have the extra time and the accuracy is not going to matter. What if it does? What if it does? And you're dead because you were carrying a little baby gun instead of a fighting handgun, right? Because, and here's kind of the rub. Here's kind of the entire summation of this episode. Why do Micro 9s exist? Subcompacts. Why do they exist? They exist because they're convenient, right? Think about that. If they were just as good as a full-size fighting handgun, right, the U.S. military would issue little baby Micro 9s. They're smaller, they're lighter. Why wouldn't they just issue every Marine a Glock 43? Why wouldn't they just issue every Marine a SIG 365? Right? Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they just issue every cop a Glock 43 for their carry? It's lighter. They got a bunch of other stuff they have to carry. Right? Why wouldn't they? They even have some of those now that have like 15-round magazines. Why wouldn't they just issue those? Because they're not as good as. Period. They're not as good as. Another reason they're not as good as, they have a shorter barrel in general, right? So even if you're shooting the same caliber, you might think, 9mm is 9mm, but it's not. A 9mm out of a 2-inch barrel is nowhere near the same as a 9mm out of a 5-inch barrel. And they do make loads for short barrels, but those loads are to optimize that short barrel. They're not as good as a good load out of a full barrel, out of a 5-inch barrel or a 4.5-inch barrel. Used to be 5 was a full-size gun. Now it's maybe a 4.5. But either one of those, 4.5, 5-inch gun, a 2-inch barrel, even if physics did not apply in any other realm of this discussion, and you were just as fast and just as accurate, that gun's not as effective. that 9mm round per round, which I like 9mm, but it's a marginal caliber. It's a great caliber. It's the best balance of shootability and effectiveness. But it's not as effective out of a micro 9. It's just not. It's still going to be better than a little baby 380, but you're giving up a lot out of a caliber that's acceptable, and you're cutting a lot of that effectiveness, literally cutting it off by cutting the barrel, because you're losing velocity, you're losing effectiveness round per round, and that's just true. They're not just as good as. That's why serious, people that fight with handguns carry a full-size fighting handgun. That's the reason I carry a full-size fighting handgun, bringing this back to the beginning. That's the reason right now I don't own a little baby Me Too Micro 9. So I can say that I have a gun and check a box. Because I don't just want to have a gun. I want to have a gun I'm effective with. I want to have a gun that I can get fast second, third round hits on target with. The only time that I would consider carrying one of those is if I can't carry a full-size gun. And a lot of people that say they can't, what they mean is they don't feel like it. How hard is it to just put on an overshirt or a vest? Even when I was doing executive protection and I had to wear like suits and things like that, I could still carry a full-size fighting handgun. It's not that hard. Even in the summer, just have one of those loose-fitting button-up shirts that you don't button up. It's not that hard. For me, the juice is almost never, ever worth the squeeze on that. And if you are absolutely in an environment where you can only carry a Micro 9, then yeah, it's better than a sharp stick. It's better than harsh words. It's still going to be better in most situations than a pocket knife. It's still going to be better than, a Kubotan or whatever you're proficient with. You should be proficient with all that stuff. But it's still better than that, but it's not a full-size fighting handgun. Again, if it were, there would be no reason. Nobody would bother carrying a bigger, heavier gun if they weren't more effective. Period. That's just, again, you can get mad if you want, but that's just true. So, you guys, one of the things I did a poll recently, you guys want to more talk about Micro 9s. Well, here's my talk about Micro 9s. And there's a reason I don't advocate for them. There's a reason I tell you to carry a full-size fighting handgun. Because I care about you and I want you to stay alive. I don't just want you to wear some, shirt with an American flag patch and drink your tactical coffee and act like a gunfighter and just think because you have a gun that you're effective. Because that's not how that works. I don't want somebody to say at your obituary, oh, but he carried a gun that was comfortable. He carried the little Micro 9 that was super trendy, that was so hot on YouTube, that everybody was pushing. I want you to not have the obituary read until it's time, right? Until you're, let's not make it any easier for your adversary. One of the great schools that I went to that's available to civilians. Like I wasn't a civilian when I got it. I was a private security contractor, but you also as a civilian can get trained by these guys. But the best training I think you can get as a civilian, PFC out of Las Vegas, Progressive Force Concepts. And one of the big things that they would say is, what do you want your enemy to do? Right? Let's say that you have to get in a gunfight, handgun to handgun. Whoever your adversary is going to be, do you want him armed with a full-size fighting handgun with a reload, with an optic? Or do you want him armed with a little baby Glock 43? Well, if you had to pick one of those two, you'd rather have him armed with the Glock 43 because it's less effective. So flip that. If somebody's trying to kill you, which one of those handguns would you rather have? Right? Think about that. I'm not saying that you're wrong for carrying a Micro 9. I know that everybody's not me. I'm not that arrogant. But I am telling you to take a sober, circumspect look and consider what you carry. You're carrying it for a serious reason, to save life, somebody else's or yours. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, and you shall not stand idly by while somebody takes the life of your neighbor. I guess that's a good place to wrap it up because I usually throw in tactical verses at the end. So With that, guys, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.